You're listening to The Higher Ed Marketer, the podcast for marketing professionals in higher education. Join us every week as we talk to the industry's greatest minds in student recruitment, donor relations, marketing trends, new technologies, and much more. If you're looking for conversations centered around where marketing in higher ed is going, this podcast is for you. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to our special Faith Leaders mini-series for the Higher Ed Marketer podcast. It's starting a little bit different. You might be asking, it sounds different, but we're really trying to explore where the intersection of faith, leadership, and higher ed marketing comes down to. And so we've got this special mini-series that we're going to be focused on. It's sponsored by the ABHE, the Association for Biblical Higher Education, and we're going to really be amplifying the voices of leaders and that are not only shaping the minds of higher ed, but also shepherding the hearts through their faith-driven leadership. And so one of the things that's different about today is that I've asked Zach Coffin to come and be my co-host. You might know Zach from being the kind of the behind the scenes, he's the vice president of the Higher Ed Marketer, but he also is a pastor. And I really wanted him to be along to co-host this episode to bring that perspective to these conversations. So Zach, it's great to have you a part of this.
Bart, it's so good to be with you too, man. I love this conversation. I love this topic. And, you know, as a pastor and being in this higher ed space, I just see there's such this incredible connection between these two. And today's conversation is a hallmark of why this conversation matters.
Yeah, we were working with, today we were joined by Dr. Philip Dearborn. He's the president of the Association for Biblical Higher Education. And they're an organization of over 158 faith-based institutions. They actually have 72,000 students across North America. And so with more than 30 years of experience in Christian higher ed, Philip brings a natural perspective on the opportunities, the challenges, and the future of theological education. And man, was it a good conversation or what?
It was so good. I appreciated so much how Philip unpacks not only the opportunities, but the challenges and the uniquenesses that are there. And there's so much opportunity. And I think often we can talk about the struggles within Christian higher ed, and the opportunities that Philip lays out are so profound. It's such a fun conversation. Yeah,
and we covered everything from generations to AI to competency-based education. Just a great segment of conversations. And so without any further ado, let's just jump right into the conversation.
Philip, we are so excited to have you on the podcast today, and we have a long-standing tradition at the Higher Ed Marketer to ask the guest to share something interesting or something that they've learned recently that the audience would find interesting. So why don't you go ahead and share that?
Well, Zach, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Bart, love being part of the show, and honored that you would have me on. So not to be like all of a sudden like not a downer at all, but something that I recently just learned. So it's kind of more of a serious thing. It's not a funny thing, but so this is commencement season. So I've been in the throes of putting together commencement addresses that I'll deliver, and so I came across a story. It was a fascinating story of Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, right? You remember that, yeah. Zach? That may be like, you know.
I absolutely. I'm a little older than I look.
Okay, all right, good. Some of your listeners may need to Google Fred Rogers, but kind of came across something, and the lesson I learned from it is use your platform to show the love of Christ. And it's an episode that he did in 1969 where he invited Officer Clemens. It was an actor. But it was kind of a police officer, and there's kind of a historic photo of them with both of their feet in the water. And he's African American, and obviously Fred is white. But it was right during in the middle of segregation, where still community pools are segregated, and you had the black pool and you had the white pool. And Fred Rogers took the opportunity in just his show, just to demonstrate the absurdity of that, and and had Officer Clemens there with his feet in the water and they actually reenacted it then in the 1980s. And Fred then washed his feet or dried his feet off. It was just such a great example of just live Christ where you are. And I think sometimes we make it so complicated to show the love of Jesus. And it's just whatever platform you have, that's what God expects you to wade into and to actually show his love. So that little fun thing that I learned in preparing for some upcoming speeches.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah, I actually do remember that episode and just how moving that experience was and the timing of that. It was a profound. Fred was so good about doing that over and over again throughout his show, just understanding the cultural moment, which I think is such an important, even for our conversation. So much of this conversation is going to be around capitalizing on these cultural moments. And so, Philip, you've been leading ABHE now for several years now.
Yep.
For those who aren't familiar, can you give us some context around who ABHE is, what ABHE does, all that fun stuff? Sure.
It's the Association for Biblical Higher Education. We're an association, been around since 1947. For many of our years, our main business was accreditation, providing accreditation services for institutions for peer evaluation recognized by the U.S. Department of Education, CHIA, others. And that's been kind of our main thing, except for the last about 15 years or so. We kind of took a step back and asked the hard question, is that the business we're in, or do we also at the same time have a responsibility to provide other services for our members to advance biblical higher education? And so that kind of birthed leadership development. So think about it from the context of professional development for leaders in biblical and Christian higher education. And so fast forward to where we are today. This next year, we'll offer 14 different leadership development conferences, as well as our annual meeting. In all of those, we'll have about 1,100 folks, leaders who will attend, be challenged in their leadership, and just advancing biblical higher education. So it's the means by which we're realizing the end of sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and growing his kingdom. So that's kind of what we've been focused on. So we still do accreditation, obviously, but we also do leadership development too.
And that's been something that I've just been so honored to be a part of over nearly a decade now, of just being one of the faculty in the professional development series and as well as the annual meeting. So I'm grateful for that. But I know in a recent meeting you and I were a part of, I think I learned for the first time that you started in Christian higher ed as an admissions counselor. And I love that. And you've obviously throughout your career have been in admissions, you've been in academic affairs, registrar, provost, now there at ABHE. So what's one of the biggest challenges you've observed in biblical or Christian higher ed over the last 20, 25 years? Yeah, it's higher education is not the same that it was 15 to 20 years ago. It's not the same that it was 5 years ago. Right. And I think our cycle of innovation and redefinition is happening at a faster clip. But it was a totally, so I'll contextualize it within, the broad spectrum of what Christian higher education is. And I'd say 15 to 20 years ago, it was very clearly defined that you had biblical higher education and you had Christian liberal arts education. They were really two extremes of a spectrum. And it was ideologically driven and theologically driven. But fast forward to where we are today, you're definitely seeing a blending of that, which I actually think is a very good thing. And I think one of the biggest challenges that's emerged that we're having to deal with today, and to me it's not a good thing. It's a race to the bottom. It's this notion that higher education is equivalent to job preparation. So if you want a good job, then you have to go to college and get a degree. And to me, that's a race to the bottom of, well, if that's the case, then I'm going to go wherever I can get it the cheapest so that I can get a job. And we all know that higher education, specifically Christian biblical higher education, you get so much more out of the value proposition of going to college than just a job. And absolutely, it's driven by our government, by the federal government. If you go on the federal the House Committee on Workforce and Education Development, it's very clear that
if you want a job, you need to go to college and get and if the college doesn't give you a degree, and you don't get a job, therefore the college is on the hook for not delivering on the promise that they made. And we know there's so much more. Yeah, well, colleges will train students for an occupation, but that's not it. I mean, there's so much more about emotional intelligence and spiritual development and understanding who we are, what it means to be created in the image of Christ. Yeah. What are my gifts? What are my talents? What are my abilities? What responsibility do I have to steward God's kingdom? What responsibility do I have to share the good news of Jesus Christ? Those are all part of that college experience, which that's job preparation? No, not at all. And that's a major concern of mine moving forward.
It's so interesting that you bring up the nuance of the Christian education. Because I'm a product of Christian higher ed, both from an undergrad and actually my master's is from an ABHE school at Kingswood University. And the most profound moments that I remember on campus were not just what was happening in the classroom, but it was the discipleship environment that was happening around that. And I think speaks to that value proposition that you're talking about is, yes, the educational piece is extremely important, but there is a uniqueness within Christian higher ed between, we blanket it with this term community, but really what's happening is these discipleship relationships.
Absolutely.
As ironing, sharpening iron, which I think is just a really unique piece of what we get to do in Christian higher ed.
It is. There's a movement out there, tearthepaperceiling.org, that's put together by pretty significant companies that we would all recognize, that basically is saying, look, if college education is just about getting the job, skip it. It's not worth it. Tear the paper, tear the degree. Mm-hmm. We will provide on-the-job training that you need in order to be successful, which I think is great. That needs to happen, but let's not underestimate the value of a college education. And you nailed it, Zach. It's discipleship. It's growing in your faith. It's understanding who you are and the responsibilities that you have. It's like a growing up period. It's a maturity that needs to happen. And my fear is if we're avoiding that exercise or that experience, what's it going to produce on the other end?
Yeah. And this is a conversation that Zach and I have had a lot. And I think you and I touched on it the last time we were together with the faith-based education organization leadership, where I was talking about AI. My prediction is that the more AI becomes a part of things, and unfortunately, as AI takes over some jobs, that it can do that, and it will. Yeah. One of the things that Christian higher education has that we're going to end up having to really lead with as the leader in our messaging is that community, that discipleship, that Absolutely. Element that can't be done with AI. And I think that we're so used to trying to keep up with the big boys and say, well, our academics are just as good and we can do that just as well. And all this, that we have something that nobody else has that they can't touch. Yeah. That I think is actually going to become what our lead messaging is going to be, is to get Absolutely. Into get away from the artificial and come to the authentic and be a part of our community, part of our growth, part of who we are. And I think that is going to be the draw, that we're going to have a lot of both Christian students and faith-based students, as well as students who are just like, I want something different than what I have.
Yeah. And it's going to require our faculty to think differently, which it's not about the transfer of knowledge. It's how do you critically think through all of this, and how do you shape it? So at the end of the day, AI is computers, right? It's programming, it's binary, it's zeros and ones. And there's a theology behind that, what is truth? And AI is only repeating what it's been programmed to do. Now, granted, it's doing it in amazing ways, but what role do we have as Christ followers to be trained in that context and actually be part of shaping what AI looks like moving forward?
Absolutely. Yeah. Bart and I have this conversation at least a couple of times a week because of all the AI training that we're doing. We have such a unique opportunity right now to actually disciple the younger generation, and not just using the tools, but discerning the theology around that. Because again, we are embodied creatures, and the tendency is going to be to live into this Gnosticism of this disembodied life. And the higher ed space, from a discipleship standpoint, has such an amazing privilege and opportunity to pour into the next generation, to not only shape how they use the generative AI tools, but actually live an embodied life, because that's the centerpiece of the gospel, with Christ Christ being fully God, fully man, and all the fun theology behind that. It's pretty profound.
And it shapes the value proposition that colleges need to make. And that's a compelling reason why, okay, if I'm going to spend this money, what do I get out of it? To me, that is such a great value proposition that we need to shape moving forward.
It's so good. And that really helps us jump into this next question of I think that there's some really great opportunities that we have right now. And so as you're looking across the landscape of the ABHE schools, what are some of the biggest opportunities that you're seeing for these institutions?
There are a ton. A lot is coming to colleges and universities to consider, and I think what leaders are going to have to do is have incredible discernment like they've never had before, because there are just so many things that are coming our way, and to have the discernment to be able to pick through, okay, this is valid, this is not, this is a direction that we need to consider, and those are opportunities, but then there are also challenges, and one of the challenges, roadblocks that's going to cause us to perhaps not move at the speed that we need to. And we know this about higher education. It moves at glacier speed. Historically, it moves at glacier speed. And that's unacceptable moving forward. We're going to have to figure out how to be nimble. And one of the hangups that I see too often happening on our college campuses, and I'd say this generally, is that we theologize our methodology. Now, there's not a problem with having a theological reason why you do something and how you do it, and it shapes it. But I'm talking about theologizing it to the level of, we've always done it this way. Right. And this is our theological reason why, and we will not move, when it really is not a theological issue. It's a choice. It's a way by which you've chosen to do something. And call a spade a spade. If that's what it is, that's what it is. But don't theologize it, because when you theologize it to that moment, it becomes canonized. Well, that's the only way we can approach it. And somebody's going to figure this out. I think we've got to start breaking down some of these walls. One of the areas I see that is we do everything ourselves, and we provide 60 majors to students, and it's A to Z service on our campuses, and we have no shared services, and we're just doing it our own. The future is partnerships. How do we legitimately create partners in the workforce, with other colleges and universities, with community organizations, with service providers? You can't do it alone. You can't be everything to everybody. And I think what it is turning the narrative. If you remember a couple of years ago, the data was out that if you're a small, private, single-purpose institution with no endowment, you might as well quit. Mm-hmm. Well, what's interesting now, the language around those institutions is actually now positive. It's boutique institutions. Right. You can provide something to the market that nobody else can. Right. So it's the whole Walmart Main Street thing. Like, quit trying to be Walmart. You can't be Walmart. There are too many competitors out there who do it better, faster, cheaper. What is your niche? What are you bringing to the market that nobody else can? And just hit it out of the park and be that boutique provider that nobody else can do. And I think we're uniquely positioned in biblical and Christian higher education to provide those boutique services.
I totally agree. And I've told many people, and you know this, Philip, that my book last year, Chasing Mission Fit, I've secretly called it my love letter to ABHE schools, because I really believe exactly what you said is, if they can understand their distinctiveness, if they can authentically present who they are, they can connect to those mission fit students who want what they have.
Absolutely.
And they are out there. They just might not know who you are, and you don't know who they are. And that's where that shared knowledge, being able to look at ways and things in different ways. And so I'm really excited about that. And I think that is one of the top opportunities. And absolutely. As I look at that, I'm thinking about what's the opposite, the challenge. I mean, you kind of touched on a little bit that we're kind of stuck in our ways. I believe too that one of the challenges is because we might be stuck in our ways, is the inability to take advantage of the things that are in front of us. And I go back to my AI example and the idea that there is a lot of opportunities available to us through generative AI. But if we get stuck on being in our ways, or just trying to whack-a-mole, trying to catch people cheating, and we're focused so much on that, and we miss the opportunities in front of us because we're not willing to change the way we teach, talk to that a little bit, because I mean, I could go on for 3 hours about this, but this is about you. So
yeah. It's the whole saying, "Don't forget who brung you to the dance. Forgive my poor English." And somehow we've got to dispel this mindset in our cultures. And again, this is broad across a lot of higher education, that we're never satisfied with where we're at. We're always trying to be something that we're not. I did a talk once, and the example I use is like we're awkward teenagers. Like we haven't quite arrived yet, but we're kind of trying to get our sea legs. But there's this notion of we haven't gotten to where we want to get to yet, and we're just in that process, and we're striving to be. And there's something that's good about that from a growth perspective, but when you're consistently doing that, you're not true to who you are. And that to me is the biggest mistake that we make. Understand who you are, because at the end of the day, you're responsible to deliver on the promises that you make. And if you can't deliver on those promises, you're going to lose market value. People are going to see through that. So figure out what you're good at and do it well, and use what's in front of you. It's a principle from the parable of the talents that I've talked on so many times. 1, 2, and 5 talents were distributed, right? So somebody got 1, somebody got 2, somebody got 5. Well, so why did 1 get 1, 1 get 2? We don't know. That's just that's the way the parable is describing how talents were distributed. And what's our responsibility? Well, if we're a 1-talent school, your responsibility is to invest those resources the best way that you can, and do an awesome job with the 1 or the 2 or the 3 or the 4 or the 5. Quit trying to, if you're a 2-talent school, quit trying to be a 5-talent school, because God is only giving you 2 talents. That's what God, and be faithful with that, and then see what the Father does with additional resources.
Yeah. And I think the part of the faithfulness in those talents sometimes goes back to that partnership, goes back to those other, being able to look and say, what are ways that I can be faithful with this? Because one of the challenges I see a lot of times is that too many schools that are like a 1-talent school, they think that, I'm going to pay attention to what the state school's doing. I'm just going to try to buy more billboards. I'm going to do something. And they make a lot of really dumb decisions because they don't understand what's going on. It's no different than, hey, I put it in the ground because I was fearful of my master. Yeah. You've got to really kind of make good decisions and think about it, and partner with people that you need to partner with to help you make those decisions. Other schools, talk to people at these leadership development conferences. And I think that is the way that we can really be the best stewards of those talents that we have. Yeah.
Yeah. So well said. Yeah. And I'll just put on there, I call it the magic bullet syndrome. We got to lose that. We keep going after the thing that's going to just turn everything around. It's not. You're not going to find it. You're not going to find it.
The closest thing is your data. Yep. And using your data and doing it wisely. And that takes takes work, and it takes moving beyond what you've always done. You have to think about different things.
What's interesting to me too about the talents analogy as well is, like, it's easy for us to apply that institutionally, of like, hey, we're a 1-talent institution or 2-talent or 5-talent institution. I think there's another layer even below that. We have to be honest with ourselves of, like, what kind of leader are we within the organization that we're serving, especially as faith-based leaders. We really have to be self-aware enough to recognize where we're at with that, and not enter this striving cycle. Because I've just worked with so many leaders, so many younger leaders specifically, that striving versus just achieving versus just the being versus doing, to use a good Robert Mulholland, analogy of like being versus doing. Like, what does it look like for us in our leadership position that we're finding a beautiful contentment in where we're at, while still desiring and longing for what God wants to shape in our institution? Yeah,
I see it all the time. I call it the romance of leadership. We've bought, and I don't fault anybody for it, because just go to Amazon or Google, leadership books. There are just tens and hundreds of thousands of leadership books, and the core message to the vast majority of them are, anybody can be a great leader. And I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. And where I have seen leaders be successful is like this self-awareness of what their capacity is.
So good.
Not everybody can be a president of a college. Not everybody can be fill in the blank. Understand who you are, what your talents, gifts, and abilities are, and put yourself in a position that maximizes those, and be okay with whatever that position is. Yep. It very well may not be president, but we've bought this lie that where I am, I can do better and I can strive to the next level of leadership. And while some of that could be true, be satisfied. And what I always tell people is find out what that sweet spot is, and then just be one tick higher, because that keeps you moving forward and developing as a leader.
Yeah, it's almost like the Bible talks about us being a body and each of us having our parts and our roles, and it's almost like the Bible talks about that kind of stuff. It's so good.
Well, it is, and we quote it and we say it's great and we preach about it and it's wonderful. But then when somebody expects me to be a thumb, I'm not willing to be that.
Which again brings us back to partnership and being a part of really great teams. It really does pull everything full circle for us to be a part of really, really great teams that all are focused on the mission. Yep. And so we've talked about some of the challenges. We've talked about some of those things. And sometimes within the Christian higher ed space, we can always talk about the things where we're behind. But I think that Christian higher ed is actually really positioned well to lead in some spaces, to provide some influence. And we kind of touched on the AI piece a little bit of where I think there's some space for us to lead in those spaces. Are there other places, Philip, as you're talking to the schools across North America, where you're seeing just leadership, where's that influence coming? Where are places we can lead?
Yeah, so there are a couple of areas that I'm seeing, and I'm always sensitive and trying to see what's kind of next out there. I'm a huge believer in means and ends. I mentioned it earlier in the show, where means are simply ways by which we achieve the greater end, and to me, that's fulfilling the Great Commission. So all of this is simply we hold loosely how we do it. So I'm always looking for what's next, what's coming up, and I think in our space there's probably two areas. One is probably more of a recent one. The other one has been around for a little bit, but we're actually starting to see traction, and that's competency-based theological education, which basically says, look, we're not going to assume that every learner has to come in at 101. Right. That there are life experiences that individual has had that fill in some of the gaps. So our job on the front end is to say, what are your deficiencies? Show us what you're competent in, but then what we're going to do is fill in where those deficiencies are. And really, I think AI is going to really accelerate this in determining what are those voids, what are those areas that you need help in. Look, you had a job for 15 years leading, whatever, this department. So you don't need some of the basic leadership skills that we cover in Leadership 101. So you're competent in that area, but what are the deficiencies? Where do we need you to, and so that becomes an efficiency and a savings, and I think a better stewardship. So competency-based, I think, is something that all of our institutions need to reckon with. It is not a delivery methodology. It is a philosophy of education. Right. And they've got to figure out, okay, how are we going to accomplish this? How are we going to accomplish our end of training the next leaders to go and make disciples, right? So I think that's one piece of it. The other one is online, believe it or not, online education. It's been around. It has now been accepted as normal delivery methodology for a lot of our campuses. You have very few resistors now with online education, but AI is really influencing the tools that are being put into online education. And recently we just came off of our conference, and I was just blown away in a 2 years time how much AI has been built into online education. And I'll give an example of the dreaded threaded discussions, right? So if anybody who's listening has done online education, it's like the thing that you don't want to do. You gotta respond to this discussion question and respond to 6 other people's comments on it. And it's the eye roll of, oh my goodness, I can't believe I have to do this. Well, there are tools that are being put into online education where an AI voice or a podcast or whatever, will respond with the learner and talk to the learner and ask questions of the learner, like verbal questions of the learner. Like you and I are having a conversation right now, you would have that with the AI bot. And it just is adding like a whole nother dimension to the delivery of online education. So I think those AI is here. It's in every aspect of our living. how is it going to change how we approach online education? And I think it's an opportunity for our institutions to kind of get on the front end of that to figure out how to incorporate it into learning.
Yeah, I saw something today, and I forwarded this to Zach, and I can certainly make this available in our show notes, but it was a video of a teacher on LinkedIn that was showing Canva just came out with a new AI coding tool. Mm-hmm. And she was showing how, because she could take the code that she developed in Canva and put it into Canvas for the learning management system. And so she was showing how she could just dream up some kind of quiz or some kind of interactive feature that her students could, assess and kind of, make sure that the learning is happening within the canvas. I mean, she showed this in a video. In 3 seconds, she had, designed this idea of this interactive game, put it into Canva. It generated the code. She copied the code, put it into the LMS, and all of a sudden, she had a tool that was an interactive game that she designed. And I was like, that's the kind of power that AI has to make us better instructors, better professors, better whatever it is. Because now all of a sudden, if we have an idea of a better way to do it, we don't have to be the one necessarily doing the threads. We don't have to be the one as a professor or as a faculty member going in and doing that. We can actually utilize these AI tools to assist us as faculty to really be able to enhance the learning for our students. And so that's just one example, but I'm really encouraged with this whole idea of competency-based, because I think we're really focusing on what is the need of the student, not as a need to get a job, but what's the need that's going to help them really learn best that we can do because we're uniquely positioned as a small institution, almost like you said earlier, that boutique institution, but being able to do that. So I'm kind of curious as we start looking at that, what are some of those challenges in actually taking that, jumping into that? Because I've been in enough campuses where I know that sometimes generational issues are a problem, sometimes different departments are a problem, sometimes the board sees things differently. Yeah. How do you address that as you kind of look at leadership? Yeah,
and obviously that's going to be an institution by institution issue that they're going to have to grapple with. Like, what are the resistor points? Doing the exercise of identifying what your resistor points are, I think, is a great exercise that institution, like what is preventing us from doing this. But I think you put your finger on some of the key ones, and it's a unique time. Tim Elmore talks about this with the number of generations that are in the workforce and the intergenerational engagement that is happening. Like it's always been a part of our realities. Like this is nothing new. We've always had multiple generations represented in the workforce. What's different is how those different generations think and how they process and the tools that they use. So at one end, you still have boomers who are in the workforce. Now they're starting to age out and Gen Xers are replacing them. But I'm not a digital native. Mr. Rogers was it, right? That was my technology. And I was the remote control as a younger kid in the family. Yep. I got up and changed the channel for people. We didn't have remote controls, right? So that's the context in which we grew up. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got Gen Zers who are coming on who just function, just wired totally different. It's not a bad thing. In fact, Tim Elmore, I think, does a great job of saying we need to embrace that and figure out how the different generations can work together. But the faculty right now, the growing generation are millennials. Millennials are becoming faculty members. Well, how they think, how they process, how they learn is fundamentally different than the Gen Xers and boomers. And we've got to embrace that and figure out how do we target the various generations, but really push so that we're not catering to an older generation, which is going off the scene, which is our tendency to do it because we want to respect and honor and all of those things. But look, we also have to survive as organizations. So how do we train the sweet spot millennials to engage in the classroom and engage learners, and how do we maximize who they are? But I think that's probably one of the bigger ones. I would say it's complicated, it's nuanced, and it's layered. There's no easy answer or response to how to figure that out. You just got to kind of dive in and figure out how to do it.
I think you bring up an interesting point of just pointing out, one, the uniqueness of each generation, but you brought up the millennials. And I think where the millennials are actually uniquely positioned is actually to do a lot of translating. Mm-hmm. And so I think the tension with generations is that generations are really good at shredding each other. Of like, what do we struggle with each generation? Why are they like this? I think we've come through a season like I used to work primarily with young adults, kids ministry, worked with churches still continue to work with churches all over the country. And the thing that I hear from young leaders over and over and over again is, can we please just be kind to each other?
Yep.
And it's so interesting to me of how if we can just operate from a little bit of a deeper place of empathy across the generations, each generation is uniquely positioned to bring the best of who they are and a little bit of understanding and cutting the sarcastic name calling and I mean, again, I'm old enough and young enough. I'm at the older end of the millennials, but like, everybody said about millennials for generations that all we did was live in our parents' basement.
Yeah.
I don't know a single millennial that lives in a parent's basement.
Yeah. No, it's so true. And I think, we've all heard the stories of the Gen Zer who brings mom and dad to the interview. Well, is that urban legend?
Right.
Did that actually happen? And maybe it happened, but by no means does that define the majority of interviews. It simply doesn't happen. And I think it's part of showing kindness to others and learning from others. And Tim was at our annual meeting this year and, gave a great story of a Gen Zer who worked at a paint store and, had TikToks and all kinds of things about, he'd mix paints and try to guess the color, right? It's a thing. And took it to the paint store and said, hey, you know what, can we partner together with this and I can promote our paint shop with it and whatever else? And they said no. Well, he went on and started his own paint shop and is being successful. And I think we have to have ears to listen because does it come with some baggage or some immature? Sure, it does. But guess what? So do you. So if we can kind of recognize that and pull together, especially when it comes to the recruitment of students, we should be listening 100% to the younger generations as to what works. And I've been in way too many conversations where we structure our websites or we structure our content management around what we as the older people think it should be versus how the consumer is actually looking at it. And we got to be way more and it takes humility to do that. It takes work to do that. But I think it's our responsibility to do that.
I love that. And man, we have had such a great conversation. We could probably go on for another hour and I don't think I would mind. But as we close this episode out, and very grateful for you to be on here, Philip, as well as just the partnership with ABHE to be a part of this network, as well as the sponsorship of this series. But we always close out with the idea of what's one final piece of advice or insight that you'd like to leave with our audience to help them take action in some way.
Yep. So this is my go-to advice because it works. And my colleague, Dave Metters, that I work with, I picked up a phrase that he uses all the time. He says, I'm a simple guy. And I think I'm a simple guy, too. I appreciate scholarship and talking ideologically and theologically and principles. But I'm a doer, and at the end of the day, something needs to get done. And so my thing is block and tackle. You can have all of the strategies that you want. You can have all of the technologies that you want. You can have all of the AI that you want. You can talk about how to do certain things, but you got to make it happen. And it's part of the stewardship thing. It goes back to the talents of looking around, what we talked about before, looking around and just doing and picking up. There was an old Disney, I think it was a Disney movie that when our kids were younger, there was this phrase of see a need, fill a need. And that's such a great piece of advice for leadership of quit talking about it, just do it. And those around you will see it. And maybe that's how you'll advance in your career, not how you manufacture how you'll advance in your career. So block and tackle, do the simple things around you. And God, I think, blesses that and gives you more responsibility.
Awesome, man. Such a good conversation. And Philip, I'm sure that there's some schools on here that want some more information from you or from ABHE. What's if they're interested in joining ABHE or exploring that, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Absolutely. So they can email me directly or abhe.org. We have a membership page that talks about who we are. We're very big about who we are and what we stand for. And we stand on the authority of the Word of God. And what I say is, if you can agree to that, we're going to serve you the best possible way we can. It's not about survival. It's about flourishing. So if it is about survival, quit now. But if it is about flourishing, we want to come alongside and help you flourish.
That's awesome. Fantastic. Well, we want to thank everybody so much for listening to the Higher Ed Marketer podcast today and for joining us for this Faith Leaders mini-series. We've got a few more episodes coming in this series. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we would really love for you to like and subscribe and tell a friend about our show and invite somebody to join in the conversation. And be sure to jump on LinkedIn as well and find the Higher Ed Marketer. We're posting great content there every day and just to help elevate higher ed marketing. We would love to have you be a part of that. And as always, the Higher Ed Marketer podcast is powered by Caylor Solutions, your go-to partner for higher ed mission fit marketing strategies and enrollment and branding needs. And again, the Faith Leaders mini-series here is sponsored by ABHE. The Association of Biblical Higher Education is an organization dedicated to strengthening institutions committed to the biblical faith-based learning. So again, thanks everybody for hanging out today, and we will see you next week for another great episode of the Higher Ed Marketer podcast. Have a great one.